Morning, morning. Welcome. I'm not too sure where Jasper is this morning, but it looks like he's got building sites in the background. So if he's planning on building something or other, I don't know, but hopefully we're going to get...
I'm sitting in my penthouse office overlooking the city with the plant in the background.
Okay. enjoying his green screen toys. So, right. Good. Okay. So, Lee, I don't know if you want to add anything to kick the morning off, but otherwise we'll... just head across to Jasper and delve into his deepest, darkest secrets. So, Jasper, I think it's over to you.
All right, let me take over the screen. Has you given me right for the screen?
Give it a bash and see. You should be able to. If you can't, let me know.
I'll just check. All right, let me go.
Looks good. We're seeing your Zoom screen at the moment.
All right, I'm taking you to one of the companies we're involved in with Gig, which is called Gig Wealth, which is, can you see my screen? Okay, and so Gig Wealth is an insurance company that can do all the normal insurance, but also build funds. And eventually, you know, whatever one can think and dream of, if you have the crowd together, you can build that instrument. So to build Gig Wealth, I had help along the way in WordPress, but then right towards the end, I also felt I need to differentiate the site with a blog. So the blog is called Generational Thinking. And I'm going to read for you out of that today. So I just go there now. And the title is The Gig Generational Inheritance Group Story. And it starts with a little picture there that describes the journey that lies ahead for every person if he wants to escape the one generation mindset and eventually end up as a three-generational family like the Ruperts and Maponias and Oppenheimers. And it's called The Journey of the Four S's: struggle, stability, success, significance. The pie chart indicates the red here is income, expenses exceed income. Then it's stability, you have it under control. Expenses is less than income, you've got a bit of surplus. Then you start diversifying. And then the phases moving from the one to the other, while you're in struggle, moving to stability, we say you're in survival phase. When you're stability towards success, we say you're in structure phase. When you're in success towards significance, we say you're now in the support phase. So you've built support around you. And then the article I wrote a couple of months ago is the following. It started in March 2008 when I did leadership training in Uganda. I kept asking myself the question, why can some people handle severe challenges and come out strong, whilst others with few challenges just give up and become dependent economically on the families and government? Then out of the blue, I heard the word mindset in my mind. As I contemplated this one word and its potential impact on people's lives, I was led to research the history of the Israelites who were slaves for over 400 years in Egypt, and all they knew was how to survive under extremely difficult circumstances by not having much expectations and accepting their lot as slaves. Then God raised up Moses, who led them out of slavery, and over the next 40 years, God downloaded a new kingdom philosophy through Moses with a vision of how they were destined to become a prosperous nation. This philosophy was so radically different from what they were programmed to believe as slaves in Egypt that the elderly people rejected it and eventually died with that mindset. We are slaves in the desert. Fortunately, the new generation of Israelites adopted that new mindset and under the leadership of Joshua conquered the promised land and started to transform into a society that became so strong and prosperous 200 years later under the reign of King Solomon, that the historians note that wealth was so abundant in Jerusalem that silver was regarded as worthless stones. I then researched the lives of generational families in the current era. Example, Oppenheimer, Rupert, Maponya, and was amazed how in all cases, the founding parents had to overcome severe odds to not only lead their families out of poverty and into wealth, but how they've implemented systems, structures, networks, and instilled in their children a certain ethos and values that enable these families to grow stronger and have bigger economical impact with each successive generation. Although the populist politicians and media loves to hate and badmouth these families, it struck me how much these families have contributed to society and how their family businesses are employing hundreds of thousands of people from all walks of life and all religious, educational, and cultural backgrounds. These families are truly the backbone of the economy in any country, and if we want to have a better future for our children, we need to develop more of these generational families. What if we could find out how they did it and develop a genetic template that could be followed by any person who wished to become the founding parent of his family legacy? That's what we did. From 2008 until 2011, we developed the genetic template, which is now called the Gig Movement. In 2011, under the leadership of Jason Riley, we started the process to become a community bank, and in 2015, we received our national license as a registered cooperative financial institution, CFI, registered with the Reserve Bank. See www.gig.coop. This became the first entity in South Africa that gave its members interest-free loans. In 2016, under the leadership of Gavin Julian, we established the Professional Gig Institute, see gig-institute.com, and this institute focuses on the ongoing financial literacy training of its members, families, and entities that have started their generational wealth building journey. In 2017, under the leadership of Trevor Nell, the Community Chamber of Commerce CCC was started, see fccc.co.za. It became the first chamber of its kind involving the whole community in all its diverse challenges. When the COVID-19 lockdown started in March 2020, it evolved into a serious national and international chamber which offers its members a virtual trade fair and a virtual mall spanning over country borders. See virtualtradefair.africa and virtualtradefair.global. With the growing membership of GIG and the CCC, the need for a unique insurance company that could provide the need for basic financial services and products, as well as create and manage sophisticated investment funds with a generational perspective, grew. GIG Wealth received its Category 2 license in December 2018 under the leadership of Rian van der Vyver. Since then, the various entities have worked in synergy to create a new economic dispensation where like-minded families and entities can collaborate on resources and ideas and create a sustainable, growing new economy for their children's children. So that's it. So let me just stop sharing.
Great, thanks, Jasper. Yeah, nice background into how it all started. And just for those of you who don't know, this has been Jasper's absolute passion for a number of years now, and find it very difficult to get him to talk outside of that. So not overly surprised that he went that route this morning, but thanks for that. I really appreciate those insights. So, right, who should we start with? Lee, let's start with you for a change.
Thanks, Jasper. It's really good to have an overview of your thinking. And again, it just prompts this question around legacy and what is it that we're investing for the generations ahead, and not to just think in the short term, not only of, how am I going to feed my family this month, but what am I actually doing that is something that is growing an investment for the long term. And it's interesting, my daughter worked on super yachts for, it ended up being 3 years, but it was sort of 1 year and then 2 years. And in her 2-year stint, she worked on a boat owned by the Gettys. which is another generational family that's had worldwide influence. And it seems, and I don't know the other families that you mentioned well enough, Jasper, but what struck me in this last reading is the hardship that first generation goes through, the sacrifices that they make, the pulling up from the bottom, and the strength that they imbibe as a result of that pull and struggle. And just wondering if there's something about the struggle that makes you stronger and more driven, and then you hand over a legacy, or you provide this legacy of wealth and well-being to your family, but they haven't gone through the same struggle. And so there seems to be an inevitable fall off the wagon, or the wheels fall off in some way, where they take this wealth that has been given to them for granted, and the responsibility of this wealth doesn't fully connect with them for, it seems like a generation or two. And I saw it, Siobhan, my daughter, helped me to see it with the Getty family, is that it takes a generation, but then again, if this mindset is there, they seem to recover. Certainly these long-term families where the legacy, there seems to be something that pulls them back up. And I don't know whether it's this natural up and down flow that is just life that we have in our own lives, and that's reflected across generations. So that's just my thinking and observation. Just that's what prompted my thinking from your article. Thanks, Jasper. And I don't know if you have any, maybe you can answer the questions at the end based on what we said.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll answer as we go. And that's certainly true. And most of the wealth created in one generation is lost within a couple of months or years with the new generation, if the second generation wasn't part of the process. And if the founding, and if that initial wealth builder didn't put in the systems and ethos and things to transfer the awareness of responsibility. And there's no guarantee that any of these families cannot collapse in the second or third or fourth generation. But in that book that I wrote, there's even families in Japan that's been going for a couple of hundreds of years, because it's been such a cultural thing that's drilled into every newborn in that family as they come into this world, that they understand their roles and responsibilities. And it's a fine line to allow your children to go through the challenges of struggle and find their own niche in life, because what worked for you 100 years ago won't work for you today. So you need to have that entrepreneurial mindset installed in the whole thing. And then ultimately, the families who then survive the ups and downs of society are those that finally put themselves into what they call a family office. And a family office is where they then have professionals running all the various aspects of family life, which release, and the family as a board that help direct the affairs of the family office. But the individual people can then live themselves out in their philanthropic endeavors and all the other things, but it doesn't affect that hard wealth that was built up over many, many years.
Great, thanks, Jasper. Yeah, it reminds me of an article I saw some years ago about the Sony Corporation, and old man Sony, who headed it up at that point in time, I think was 90 years old, and he just called a strategic session with his team, and they were doing their 99-year forecast. So, at 90 years old, he was doing his 99-year plan for the organization. I thought that was quite something. Right, so Ed, let's come across to you next.
Yeah, that was, like Lee said, it was really nice to see sort of some background into what forms you, Jasper. I've got sort of mixed feelings about it, because I think there are some family companies that are good, and there's some family companies that are bad. There's a company in America, Wigwam Socks, for which I'm an ambassador, fourth generation American company, and the average tenure of an employee there is about 25 years. I think the average in America is 4 years. So it shows you they treat their employees well. They've got very good environmental credentials. They're very well liked in the community. But then you get other companies which are hated because they haven't got the same values, and they just exploit people. So I'm not sure that there's a one-size-fits-all approach, that all generational businesses are good. And like you said, I think there are quite a few that the next generation ruin it all. I'm thinking in my mind Trump, perhaps. You know, is Trump going through his legacy and destroying it all? And will there be a future for the Trump empire? And I think, you know, in the UK, we've got great examples of where it's come through in farming. They've passed the farm on from one generation to another generation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So, yeah. And yeah, Lee's got a good point. The generations further down don't necessarily have the same struggle. And there's a saying, you know, what's the best way to make £1 million? Well, inherit a £2 million company from your parents. So I think as the generations go further along, it gets watered down. That's my sort of thoughts.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, it's always a challenge if the mindset is not carried through, and I think oftentimes, you know, the frenetic activity of the original people who made the money tends to disconnect them from their subsequent generations. Therefore, the mindset is not actually followed through on. So I think that's a big part of Jasper's message. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, Jasper, but maybe you'd like to add into that.
No, you're saying it well. I will keep quiet.
I got something right at last. Well done. Okay, good. Right, Mpolelo, let's come across to you next.
Morning again. Sorry, I'm catching bits and pieces today. My internet is unstable again, so I hear the first, the third, the fifth word, and all other ones are missed in between. But yeah, the whole I'm generational inheritance, and not just so much in terms of financial terms, but also in terms of the moral fiber of the family. And I think possibly part of what elongates a family's physical wealth also has to do with the moral fiber of that family. I think Edward made a nice example in terms of, if you think of a Trump family, what happens with the value system that they carry in terms of the wealth and so forth over time. But then I have also a second thought that comes from where one comes from, to say generally one comes from a community of people that, or a generation that, because of their experiences of the past, could not give much to the next generation. So there's a lot to learn. I mean, almost everything I've had to learn in life, I couldn't pick up from anyone. Even in doing business, I don't have an uncle that says, hey, dude, you know, when you have these problems, this is what you do. I've tried this before. That's what happened. And so the trial and error, you find that it's quite steep and so forth. I guess with you, Jasper, having looked at the first founding fathers and the difficulties that they go through, have you
Yep, we seem to have lost Mpumelelo there. So
overcome the fact that they don't have a reference point? They do not know what are the building blocks of what they're putting together. Or was it also for them trial and error, and by some God's grace fortune that you then do well, and others did the same, but find that they did not make the money that others that others made. That would be my question.
Great, thanks, Mpumalelo. Jasper, do you want to comment on that?
I missed a bit of the question there, but I suppose it was with these founding fathers or founding parents who had no role models to work on. I think they did, and I think like in the case of Maponya, for instance, the unsung heroes in that story was probably his parents, who as I think domestic servants put their kids to school, and there he started to have a better understanding of the world around him, so that by the time he moved in, and he was initially studied fully qualified teacher, but then moved out into business. And I think the underlying thing that I found with all the founding fathers and parents is that they found themselves mentors, and it didn't say that they became lifelong friends, but they found themselves mentors in the areas that they pursued. So whether it was to learn more about the diamond industry, or learn more about tobacco, or business, retail, whatever. So I think the key there is nobody knows it all. And if you don't have it in your family, but you know where you want to go, is surround yourself with mentors in that area.
Great, thanks, Jasper. I think that's key, the mastermind principle. So Steve, let's come across to you next.
Thanks, Ivan. So everyone, I'm going to have to dump and run. I've got another appointment at 8:30, but I wanted to tell you a story of our exposure out here. We live in the northwest province in Rustenburg, where approximately about 60% of the world's platinum comes from at the moment. And I'm going to butcher the details of this story, but I think the general picture is quite interesting. So the Bafokeng tribe out here owns a huge amount of land in terms of the platinum mines. And the history there is that the king of the Bafokeng tribe sent the Botswana men out to work in the mines. It was something like 100 or so years ago. And they walked all the way from the Rustenburg area, just something like couple of hundred kilometers, to go and work in these mines, and made a fortune there. And the present day, what has happened because of that is they have a 350 million rand flagship school system. They have a teacher training college. They built the 350 odd million rand sports center for the 2010 World Cup. I hear that they're currently investing in healthcare in terms of the tribe. And my daughter is privileged enough, she's in grade R at the Labone College, which is the flagship school that they built. And every morning when the grade 8s to 12s get dropped off at the school, they're required to climb out of their parents' vehicles at the front gate of the school, and they have to walk up through the long drive up to the main campus to get to their classes. And the point of that is to connect them with their history of the men who more than 100 years ago walked this long distance to go and work in the mines, to get the starting, to give them the starting point that they have as a tribe. It's an absolutely fascinating sort of history for me, and I love the idea that they are engaging in storytelling as a way of keeping subsequent generations connected with where their wealth came from. They also have a very young king, Khosi, and he is incredibly forward-thinking. So a lot of the things that, you know, Jasper, that you've described as well, they've got a board and they've got great direction and incredible plans. And I think 40-odd% of this school are children from the tribe and the Bafokeng area who are on 100% bursaries to be given first-class education. And from there, they're sent out into all sorts of numerous tertiary options. But you can also feel the tension in the story, because you can see parents who drive their kids up the driveway instead of dropping them off. And so you can see this battle as the generations roll on with staying present to where they came from and where they're going. And so I find that really interesting. Thanks for the article there, Jasper. That's been fun. Thanks, man.
Great, thanks, Steve. Yeah, and it's amazing, you know, so infrequently hear these really good news stories out of our communities, and it's really good to hear that, and I think it should be highlighted more and spoken about more. It's what can be done when people set their minds to it. Right, Stella, let's come across to you next.
Morning, everyone. Yeah, that was very interesting. Thanks, Jasper, for sharing that. One thing that I just took from your story is the tenacity to pursue a certain idea. I'm thinking specifically around the commercial bank, that it was a couple of years in progress to get to that stage. It wasn't just, you know, easy. I think I'm going to do it in 3 or 4 months. It's done. It took years to get to that. So I was just thinking about that. Also, the in that story, generations also learn that, you know, some things takes time to accomplish, and that you must continue with your dedication and your vision of what you want to accomplish later on, and that it's not always easy to do. And then I just also want to touch on Mpumelelo on the moral values side of the legacy. I see that so in my children, and I'm looking at the values that my dad has taught us as children. Yesterday there was, I didn't join you guys yesterday because my brother, I had to go fetch him at the airport or take him to the airport. He worked in the Netherlands since January, and he came back 10 days ago, and he was in quarantine, and I had to fetch him from Sandton, take him to the airport to fly to Durban to his family in KZN. And he was telling me about you know, how he's working in the Netherlands, and the guys are already complaining that he's gone because of his knowledge and his skills that he's got. And one of the guys told the boss, "Now, if Rulof doesn't come back, you can accept my resignation." And I see that in myself and my sister also, the dedication to work, and that has also, and the integrity and the honesty with how you do your work. And that has actually struck me that has filtered through to my children, where my daughter has, but she's a free spirit, and she wanted to go overseas, and she's been there for 4 years, and she created a new life for her there. And in February, she got a new job at a new school as a teacher. And then about 3 weeks ago, she told me that she was made head teacher at the school, and there's about 15 teachers. So it's just that other side, apart from financial, the other values that I treasure so much, that I want to leave the legacy, and that legacy to carry on to future generations. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Stella. All right, Jasper Cloete, welcome. What are your thoughts on what you've been hearing so far? I think is this your first time with us this morning?
Yeah, it's I ran early this morning so that I could catch Jasper. You know, he's a great mate of mine and a mentor, and I've followed him for years. So always nice to do something different. So JC, always good to catch up with you and the team. Well done. It's you know, I'm always reminded of two things. The first is a saying that behind every great family wealth is a great family crime, and I think we need to we need to always be mindful that in a lot of instances, family wealth has been amassed not through the good of all community. And I think that's the word I want to use here. I want to use the word community versus family, because I think if you can get the community that you're in, and again, Jasper, you touched on it with Moses and the Jews. They are a community, and you know, they have an unspoken word that they touch their money 17 times before they let it go out of the community. So that just assists the community in the families in the community, building that family wealth and those family legacies inside of those communities. So, you know, I think the second is about time, and we underestimate how long things take to get done, and the wealth journey. It's I don't know, JC, I think our walk has been 25 years. And in 2020, we then get some curveballs that throw things in or out of your kilter in your wealth creation. But they also allow us to refocus our lives when there are crises in our lives, whether they're a health crisis or the death of a family member or a global crisis like we're going through now with this pandemic. And I get excited when guys like Jasper and the team that you got there at Wisdoms have put stuff in place that, Palelo, you can plug in and play here. I mean, there is a manual, there is a book, there is a formula to follow. And, you know, what one has to do is put one's hand up and say, today is the day and no further. And often it's that first step of just putting our hands up and saying, today's the day. And then not making any excuses for the follow through. So yeah, so I'm really glad that I ran early today, that I could jump in here and catch this. JC, I like the way you framed it. It's new for me, the way you brought the story in, and I love it. And I've sent you a little thing saying we need that tea, because in most of the businesses that families have created, they have a product and then they have distribution, and you sure have built product, and now it's time to build distribution. So yeah, well done, team. Loved it, and I've been loving catching up on some of the stuff that you put out every day, Lee. So kudos to you.
Great, thanks, Trevor. And maybe you must just set your alarm clock a little bit earlier from now on and join us on a more regular basis. So we'd love to have you in on a more regular slot if you can. So that's great. Cecile, let's come across to you next.
Hi, it is very interesting, Jasper. The article was very interesting, and it was in a structured, graphical way of exactly what the gig wealth is about. And it was, yeah, when one of the other speakers were talking, I remembered when, it's a pity that she's not on this group, but when Paul was sharing her story with us, she came from a very wealthy family, and that her grandmother was this matriarch, and she had amassed big wealth, and it seemed like the next generation squandered all the money. And I was wondering how a family like that would feel, and I still wanted to ask him, Paul, what did her grandmother think about the next generation that didn't have great value to what they actually inherited just off the cuff, and squandered it. It would be interesting to hear if Paul ever had that conversation with the grandmother, to know that what can happen if the next generation doesn't have the same value to whatever the first generation or the previous generation had worked so hard, their fingers to the bone to get it. Because I'm sure someone like Mpo's grandmother didn't inherit anything. I'm sure Mpo's grandmother worked her fingers to the bone to get what she could pass on to the rest of her family. And it is, about 30 years ago, we were friends with the Ingledews, and the Ingledews came, the dad was also a multimillionaire in South Africa, and it was to do in the tiling industry. And his only son, we were friends with him, and we stayed with him for a while when we moved to Johannesburg. And I remember Norman was obsessed. It was the other way around, like for Paul's family. Norman was obsessed to increase the family's wealth, not to, like you said, how do you get $1 million? You start with 2 million. Norman was obsessed with doing it the other way around, to increase the family's wealth, not just live on the family's wealth, so that people don't just say, oh, look, he inherited all this money and now he's squandering all this money. So yeah, it's very interesting. And why some people would actually want to build on it and others would think, oh, now we can live off the fat of the land.
Great, thanks, Cecile. Right, Donovan, let's come across to you next.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm not fully prepared, but I was just having thoughts about control and loyalty. So in terms of your college generational businesses, obviously you would like to control as much as you can by instilling values that, you know, hopefully will be carried through the generations. And then in terms of loyalty, it's a way of almost guaranteeing loyalty by keeping it in the family. Loyalty you cannot buy, so you cannot pay someone to be loyal, but when you identify him as a member of the family or clan, or, you know, relating to your heritage, that can in a way help with the process of you know, the control and the loyalty. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Donovan. Yeah, and that's perhaps a whole another topic for another discussion, but we can chat about that at some stage. So, right, Trivanel, let's get across to you.
Okay, so for the next 3 days, if you people have got time, I'd like to actually discuss all the contradictions that have been thrown into this conversation today. Firstly, who was that talking just prior to me so loud and so clear? Donovan, thank you very much for actually getting your technology up to speed. I'll tell you a couple of notes here. I think the contradictions that I actually pick up here actually relate something to my personal life. I was born into a family that was as poor as a church mouse. And many of the people's stories here over the last 150 odd days seem to have been quite similar. So I made a note here. If you had a choice in the matter, and if everyone was asked this question, if you had a choice in the matter on the day that you were born, what type of family would you like to be born into? One that is as poor as a church mouse, or one that has $1 billion or more in assets? And I think we have to be honest in answering that particular question. From my side, I'd rather have been given the opportunity to have been born on a yacht, a super yacht, not just a yacht, a super yacht somewhere off the coast of Croatia, so that I could actually work out what it is I'd like to do with my time and money. And as I was listening to Jasper's story, you know, I just have to doff my cap. I'm doing that slowly so that no one can see my wig has fallen off here today. Jasper, I think Stella nailed it, 100%. No one recognizes the toil of the journey going forward and the visionary. And I wrote down, this is a visionary where the vision is now really unfolding. The focus that you have had. When I first met you, pain in the ass in my swimming lane, you know, the vision wasn't quite as well focused for me as it was in your mind. And I've seen how you've toiled and put this together, and looking back, as you wrote that article, it's very easy now to see how the dots and the stepping stones have all really come together. So I doff my hat at that, Jasper. The hard toil, because I know that just some of the element of this toil goes back to 2012. So I wrote here that it always looks like a no-brainer looking back. And I think you've actually nailed it. I'm not one that is a believer in legacy, perhaps because my interpretation of the word legacy is very different to family generational legacy. That's just a natural at the background. How do you look after your kids? Where's your insurance policy, etc.? But I seem to have been brought up in an environment where I see a lot of people wanting a legacy of their names, their personal names. And an indication of that is, I think Donald Trump, his idea of legacy, one of his ideas of a legacy I read is he'd like to see his head carved into a mountainside, and he'd like to erase another. No, he'd like to be next to the other four presidents there. He just wants to aggrandize his personal name. I think that's it. But I also think he's looking after his family interests as well. What else can I give you there? Oh, Trevor Cloete touched on something, and I think it was, he said we underestimate the time it takes. And I wrote there, look, everything is contradictory, because I also want to refer to you that the Zuckerbergs of this world, the instant billionaires of this world, you can actually amass billions, that's the exercise, in a short amount of time. So we've actually got to try and look at all this information from different perspectives. Yes, it takes a long time, but also if you have a look at the way that these guys actually use time, opportunity, and 2020 has been a crisis that for me is an accelerant. And I think what's happening here is the gig movement is able to use this time as an accelerant to really now jump forward. The hard work has all been done. It's that old story of 10 years to become an instant overnight success. What else can I say? There was one other comment, please. Jasper opened up with, wealth was so abundant in Israel that silver was regarded as a worthless stone. Okay, interesting story, because everything is relative. And that's why I don't want people to poo-poo people that have amassed billions and billions and have amassed assets. And because it's on the back of those assets that we can actually grow. The sad story that Trevor brought up is a lot of these assets have been built off criminal enterprises, but right now we can actually turn around and look to a guy like Jasper and say, well, how do you take good and build these enterprises off good, go after abundance, but don't poo-poo the idea of people building great assets, building great wealth, and that can actually make a positive difference in the world. Now, I've got a few things to say, but I better shut up here.
Thanks, Trevor. We can put you back on the line in another session. But Jasper, maybe you just want to wrap up quickly from your side. Any final thoughts or comments on what the folks have said?
No, thank you for all the comments. And I think with a topic like that, it's never complete, because it's an ongoing learning curve, because you keep on doing, you pursue the same goal but in different changing circumstances. And as more and more people buy into the story, they bring their perspective to the table. And like Trevor said, I can understand the vision much clearer today than 3 years ago, but it's as a result of having met people like yourself, Ivan and Trevor, and having had these discussions hundreds and hundreds of times. Yeah, so I think in all of our lives, your own stories never finish until the day you die, and then it's not finished because you've only started the process. So it's I think that gives me peace of mind that you don't have to necessarily complete things and have your face carved out in mountains and stuff like that. It's more about being instrumental in directing the affairs of generations after you.
Thanks so much, Jasper. Right, Lee, I think back to you. Wrap up for the morning and tell us what's on the cards for tomorrow.
Well, there's two thoughts, and I think it will involve two different days. But the one is to simply ask ourselves the question, what legacy do we want to leave? So I think that is worth pursuing and thinking about. And that's with the idea of what are we doing now with the end in mind. So it's the last frame of the picture. So what is our last frame of our movie? And how do we see that last frame? So that's what I'm suggesting we talk about tomorrow. But the other sort of question that's mulling over in my mind is how much does the individual and the community play off each other? You know, what is our responsibility to the family versus the responsibility to ourselves? And if we, as Trevor Cloete said, and if we expand that to community, and I think it's especially relevant in pandemic times, where there are those societies that have elevated the individual to the point where I defend my right to not wear a mask versus my responsibility to protect the community. So that's the other one that I would like us to think about. But let's start tomorrow with legacy.
Right, thanks Lee. Thanks everyone for all your thoughts and your input. I hope you have a fantastic day further, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Have a good one. Cheers now.